Today we are going to talk about inductive reasoning and its opposite, which is deductive reasoning. We actually did talk a little bit briefly about deductive reasoning once before this year, but it was just kind of in passing. So we'll hit again what that means as well. So inductive reasoning is when we draw conclusions based on observations. It's probably true, but it's not always true. Okay, so a key word for inductive is like noticed. Okay, so for example, I noticed that for the first few weeks of school, on Thursdays, I was grumpy because there was no pizza. But then on Friday, there was pizza. So after a few weeks, I decided that this year, pizza must be on Fridays instead of Thursdays. Okay, so that's not necessarily a fact because I didn't do any research, I didn't talk to the kitchen and ask them, I didn't base this off of facts, but I based it off of a few weeks of observations. That I wasn't getting on Thursday anymore, but I was now getting pizza on Fridays. And it's different pizza than used to be pizza. But that is inductive reasoning. I'm basing it on a few observations. Probably true, but not always true. Because patterns can change. Okay. Deductive reasoning is when we draw a conclusion based on accepted statements, like definitions, postulates, or theorems, based on facts. Okay? If the facts are true, and our logic is true, then the result that we reach must be true. So deductive reasoning is like what we do in proofs. When we're basing on given information, we're basing on definitions and postulates and theorems and building a logical process. That is deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is more like, well, I noticed that this seems to be happening. When we look for number patterns, we are looking at inductive reasoning. Okay? So what we're going to do in these ones is we want to come up with, it says the next number here, but I'm going to have us do the next two numbers because that's what your homework's actually going to have you do, is come up with the next two numbers in a pattern. It is dangerous to assume a pattern based on just a couple of numbers because there are a lot of ways I can get myself from 3 to 6. But if I can find something that continues to work for more, then I can assume it's going to continue to work. That's inductive reasoning because it's not necessarily going to happen. Patterns can change. But we can assume the pattern will continue. So in this first one, getting from 3 to 6 to 12 to 24, what am I doing? Doubling. So if I assume that pattern continues, then I would double and get 48, double and get 96. Okay? We're going to go for the next two numbers in each sequence because that's what your homework asks you to do. For the next one, getting from 11 to 15 to 19 to 23, what am I doing? Adding 4. So I'm going to go 27, 31. The next one's a little bit trickier. To get from 5 to 6 to 8 to 11 to 15, what's happening? We're adding one more each time. So to get from 5 to 6, I add 1. Then I add 2 brings me to 8. Add 3 brings me to 11. Add 4 brings me to 15. So next would be
20.
Adding 5 gets me to 20. And then adding 6 gets me to 26. So we're not doing exactly the same thing every time, but there's a pattern to what we are doing. You do not need to write rules for these patterns. That can actually be a pretty tricky thing. In Algebra 2, there's a whole unit about different strategies and rules that we can use to kind of come up with formulas. You don't need to do that. You just need to predict what our next terms are going to be.
Why is there 3 in terms?
1, 2, 3. Number 1.
Number 3. Yeah.
What would the rule be for that if you wanted to find out?
It would probably be quadratic. So that's why we're not worrying about that. I would have to have some n squareds and stuff.
Those
in
are all
that rule.
inductive.
So these are all inductive because it's all assuming a pattern will continue on. For our next examples, we're going to be given a little story and we want to decide whether this is inductive or deductive reasoning that our character uses to draw a conclusion. So Ramon noticed that spaghetti had been on the school menu for the past 5 Wednesdays. Ramon decides the school always serves spaghetti on Wednesday. Inductive or deductive? Inductive. What's our key word there?
Notice.
Noticed. Okay. He noticed something. He's making observations. Kai did his assignment, adding the lengths of the sides of the triangles to find perimeters. Noticing the results for several equilateral triangles, he guesses the perimeter of every equilateral triangle is 3 times the length of a side. It's a true conclusion. How did he reach it?
Inductive.
Inductive. What's the key word?
Notices.
Notices and then also guesses. That's a pretty good clue that this might not be based on facts. Okay? It's a good conclusion. It's true. He's right, but he did that inductively by noticing a pattern to his answers.
If notice is in the question, is it always inductive?
Yes, noticing is going to be inductive.
I noticed that.
Yes, you found a pattern. Okay. By using the definitions of equilateral triangles, a triangle with 3 congruent sides, and perimeter, the sums of the lengths of the sides, Katie concludes that the perimeter of every equilateral triangle is 3 times the length of a side. Same conclusion as our other friend Kai, but how did she reach it?
Deductive.
Deductive. What's the difference here?
By using definitions.
By using definitions.
Facts.
Definitions are facts. So she's basing this on facts. Linda observes that -1 squared is +1. -1 to the 4th is +1. -1 to the 6th is +1. She concludes every even power of -1 is equal to +1.
Inductive.
Inductive. Keyword?
Observe.
Observes. She's still concluding, so we can't just look at the word conclude. Last time we had the word conclude, and that was deductive. We can still make conclusions inductively, but if we're doing it by observing, that's what we want to look for. Observe or notice are going to be keywords for inductive. John knows that multiplying a number by -1 merely changes the sign of the number. He reasons that multiplying a number by an even power of -1 will change the sign an even number of times. He concludes that this is equivalent to multiplying a number by +1, so every even power of -1 is equal to +1.
1.
Is this inductive or deductive?
Deductive.
It's deductive. There's not necessarily a key word in here. Maybe knows, but that's still a little foggy. We could say that we know something inductively. He's using facts. He's using facts about numbers and a fact about what happens when you multiply it by a -1. That when you multiply by a -1, it just changes the sign of a number. So he's basing this on number facts. We are going to omit these next couple of examples, which means that as a long weekend gift, you get to omit some of your problems here. So you will just be doing 1 through 17. It's all not odd, 1 to 17 odd. But they're pattern questions, so they go fairly quickly. But before you jump into that, I have a question for you. And I want some good discussion here before we head into the homework time. My question is, what are some things that we can know about God, and do we know them inductively or deductively?
Inductive.
Well, what are some things that we can know? And then, do we know that thing inductively or deductively?
Well, if you're taking the Bible as true, you know that God loves us deductively because it says in the Bible that God loves us and never changes.
Yeah, so 1 John 4, 7 and 8 says God is love. And we've got John 3:16 that God so loved the world. So if we take the Bible as a fact, that would be a deductive way of knowing. Could we also know that God loves us inductively?
Yes.
How would we know that?
If you took stories
Died for us.
and see what he did, God did, or his decisions, we can make a conclusion of what his motives were.
Yeah, so we could look at stories of characters in the Bible. We could look at stories of people we know in our churches and our families and recognize times that God has stepped into their lives and reason that the way he was acting was out of love. And we can feel that in our own lives sometimes too.
If we take the Bible as word, we know that God created the world, and that would be deductive.
Okay, so we didn't observe creation. So we cannot know that God created inductively. But if we take the Bible as a fact, we can know God created deductively. There are some other things that we can know, and do we know them inductively or deductively? Get one more and then I'll set you free for your homework.
We know that Jesus existed, and we don't even have to have the Bible to know that fact because it's been proven by history, so it would be deductive.
Okay? So yeah, so we know that he at least existed as a person because there's other historical records. If we want to know that he died and rose again, then we pretty much have to be trusting the Bible on that one. There aren't too many other historical documents that are going to back that up. But if we take the Bible as fact and other historical documents, we can know some things about the life of Jesus. We can't know it inductively because we weren't there to observe it. Okay? All right, good job on that. Homework 1 to 17, all, and that will be due on Monday.
It's Rocky and the Bucket.